Okay, so welcome to what I believe is the 59th episode of the Path Less Chosen pod, the podcast showing the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name is Jamie, and there is actually no Sol today, which I'm sure you might have guessed given the fact that I was doing the introduction, which he's usually pretty good at. But yeah, it's just me, and the reason being there's a bit of an issue with time zones with our next guest. Sol is in Bali, which is 7 hours ahead. I'm obviously in the UK, and then he is in the United States and 8 hours behind. So it's just me that's going to be able to take this. I'm sure people that follow Sol on Instagram know how busy and how hectic he is with his business at the minute, and the timings just didn't work out. So hopefully I will do okay by myself. So please do stick around, as I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. Today's episode is with John. So John started off as a software developer, but then he was retired and financially free by the age of 33. He continued to work on his projects and on the software development side, and then he also founded a company and brand called the Bulldog Mindset, which is helping men to be proud of being men, which is a really interesting concept in itself, and he's going to talk about that today. But I will mention, as I usually do, the kind of three things that I think you should be most looking forward to in this episode. The first one is what it's actually like and the challenges of being retired at the age of 33. The second is how he went from a software developer who couldn't even talk to girls to living his dream life. And the third one is why you should consider buying your first house at the age of just 19. Okay, so hopefully that sounds interesting enough and you will stick with me. I know Sol usually does this bit as well, but it'd be good to mention now that if anyone does have any ideas for guests and they might know anybody listening or any friends of them that are going down a path less chosen that they think would be willing to share their kind of story with us, we always love to hear their stories and we'd love to have them on the podcast. And yeah, it's always good for us to, in terms of expanding our network through our audience already. So any ideas like that, please do let us know. But otherwise, I will stop talking and I'll go straight to my first question and we can get John on. Thank you, John, for joining us. Yeah, really appreciate it, obviously, joining from the United States. I think one of the biggest questions that we've got straight away that Sol and I discussed and that I think most people listening would love to pick your brains on is, of course, how you retired at the age of 33. But I think initially, just to kick us off, what is it like to have retired at 33 and what life have you been able to live since?
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, when I use the word retired, right, it means that I don't have to work, but I'm still working, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm working a lot too, right? But but what's nice is to not have to, right? So, just last year I took a trip with my wife to the Maldives for 3 weeks, and we
Wow.
visited Thailand and Singapore on the way, and it was great. And we did some other trip to Switzerland, and so it's nice to not have to work, to not have to have someone else to tell you what to do, to know that you've got your life. You can live it how you want to, right?
Love that.
Obviously, you're not gonna. When I first envisioned retiring young, and that was my dream, I thought I'm gonna sip mai tais and play video games, on the beach. And I actually did. I moved to Hawaii to do that for 2 months, and I was miserable. I was the most
Wow.
miserable I've ever been in my life. And so what I realized was that you still have to have purpose. You still have to have a mission in life. It's just great when it's your own mission as opposed to someone else's, right? And so that's yeah. So it's been an amazing thing, but it's also been a challenging thing.
Yeah.
Having freedom is something that not a lot of people can handle. You have to learn how to handle freedom, actually.
Yeah, and then that's an interesting lead on to kind of what are the biggest challenges because I think most people will like to hear the sound of going to the Maldives, living in Hawaii, playing video games, whatever it might be that their interests are, thinking they can spend all time with it. I guess it's a kind of common cliche that people talk about in terms of finding a purpose, but why is it? Like, what were the biggest challenges that you found? Like, why did you feel like you had to give yourself a purpose again?
Yeah, it's just, you know, it's hard to say exactly what it is. I think there's just something, Tony Robbins said it best. He said, if you're not growing, you're dying.
Right.
And that's what I would feel like when I'm not pursuing, even, it's not even just the money side of it, right? So I've found with myself, even, I'm running marathons, I'm training in the gym. I have to be pushing myself hard. Otherwise I just don't feel like I'm growing. I don't feel happy, or fulfilled. And I think a lot of people they think, oh, no, that's never going to be me. Yeah, if I won the lottery, if I had, I would enjoy that a lot more. And I'm not saying that there's not enjoyment out of it, but the big challenge is that when you think about it, most people's lives they revolve around their job, their career, in some degree making money,
Yeah.
and so what does your life look like when that's not the main focus? And then also there's challenges around, hey, you've built up this empire. Do you just let it go? Right? Do
Yeah.
you want to continue to grow? I think a good example of this is Elon Musk, for example, right? Because a lot of people are
Yeah.
like, what are you doing, man? Like why are you still working and sleeping on the floor of the Tesla factory, right? And all this stuff. And it's because he understands it, or whether he understands or not, he's maybe a victim of it, is that you've got to keep on going. You got to keep on pushing. It's not about just making the money. And right now, or when people are in that sustenance phase, when they're just in survival mode, they're thinking, okay, well, yeah, if I didn't have to do this stuff, that would be great. But when you graduate from that, you have a whole new set of problems. Now you have to figure out, well, what is the purpose of life? You have to ask some of these bigger questions. What's the meaning, right? How do I contribute? Where's my real value? Did I get lucky? Am I, all these things start to become questions that you have to answer. And how do I spend my time the most productively that makes sense for me, that brings me fulfillment and joy? What's my contribution to society, to other people, right? These are big questions that you have to answer that I was not prepared for, to be honest with.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. It's amazing to kind of hear your mindset on that, because I think listening from myself as someone who's now 25, and then also the majority of our kind of audience are around kind of students, so kind of 18 up until around 25, in terms of people who have gone down maybe a corporate route initially, and they're probably still questioning those kind of things, but they're not doing it with a sense of freedom because they're still kind of tied to the constraints of the job. So before we go into a bit more detail then on what you've just spoken about, I know it's a long story and I know there's lots of different aspects to it, but it'd be good for people to understand, how is it you've actually got to this point? I know you started out down more of a corporate route, for example, but you managed to achieve that kind of financial freedom and so-called retirement, where you've managed to then switch to this new mindset in quite a short period of time. So I think people would love to hear, how did that journey play out?
Yeah. So a large portion of it was by accident. So what really started this out was I bought my first house when I was 19 years old. Not because
Wow.
I was smart, not because I was thinking about the future investing. The only reason why I bought my house at 19 was because, and this was a good thought, as I said, I don't want to pay rent. I thought it seems silly to
Love
pay
that.
rent. I didn't know much about economics or real estate investing, but I thought if there's some way that I could avoid paying rent, and instead, if I'm buying some of this, made sense to me. So it was really difficult to buy a house at 19. I didn't have money. I had
Yeah.
a very low paying job, but somehow I found a real estate agent that was willing to work with me, and I bought this $68,000 house in Boise, Idaho,
Wow.
and it was ridiculous interest rate, 13% with a prepayment penalty, because I had no credit history, but somehow I was able to pull this thing off.
Amazing.
And I didn't really know what I was doing at that point. I didn't have a plan for real estate investment. But what ended up happening was I was a software developer at the time, and I got this amazing job opportunity in Los Angeles. And so I packed up my stuff, moved from Boise, Idaho to Los Angeles. And this was this crazy job. At 19, 20 years old, it was making, at the time, $75 an hour, but it was contract. So there was like this tax benefit to it. So it was the equivalent of making, like $150,000, $170,000 a year.
Wow.
And this is 20 something years ago, right? So this
Yeah.
was just crazy opportunity, just lucky to get that opportunity, because I was not that great of a software developer. It was just during the .com boom, and they
Yeah.
were just
Right.
hiring like crazy, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So I packed up my stuff, moved, and then I was going to live real frugally. My plan was, I was like, okay, I can get rich from this, right?
Wow.
And so I slept on the mattress on the floor, was buying macaroni and cheese, and I was doing the math on this. I was like, okay, well, if I make like 175, there's taxes. If I live very meagerly, a meager existence, I could probably save $100,000 a year. And
Wow.
then I was like, well, okay, how long to become a millionaire? Well, wait a minute, 10 years. Wait, hold on.
Wow.
And then I was like, well, wait a minute, inflation. So actually, probably 13 years, the equivalent. And it's like, this is insane. I have to sleep on the floor for 13 years, eat macaroni and cheese, save every penny. There's no way this is worth it. And that's only a millionaire. That's not even rich. That's a millionaire, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, what the heck? How does anyone who even makes more money than I do, or who could make this kind of money at this age? Even lawyers and doctors don't make. So how could anyone? So I started researching, and I found that the majority of the wealth, the majority of the people who became wealthy, at least in the United States, did so from real estate investment. So I found a book called The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller. And I read that book and I was like, it makes sense. I get it. I see how this works with leveraged appreciation, borrowing other people's money, just a conservative approach of buying one property per year, which might seem kind of crazy to do, but it's not that difficult to do if you're making okay money. You can put aside, and there were times where I was making a lot less money, but I just came up with this plan of, all right, I'm going to buy one property per year, and they weren't expensive properties. It was just whatever I could do to save that money, and what happened was that was my plan, and I was like, okay, at the worst case scenario, in 15 years, the properties will appreciate enough that I could sell the first property I bought and then use some of that money to buy another property and just keep the thing going. Or I could wait 30 years, pay them off, and then after 30 years, I would have each successive property paid off. And so it's like, it was a foolproof plan. I was like, there's no way this could not work. And I was, like I said, 20 at the time. So guaranteed retirement by 50, right? But of course you want faster than that. And so I was a software developer, and I had a couple of jobs, and I did well for myself at times. But what really moved the needle was I started a blog. I started this blog called Simple Programmer. I was just going to kind of share the stuff I was learning. I respected other developers who had blogs, but within a year, I started to notice traffic was coming to that blog, and I was like, oh, it's not just my mom and my coworkers that are reading this, right? And then all of a sudden, I started to get these opportunities. I got opportunities to speak at this local code camp, but then one of the kind of famous developer podcasters, Scott Hanselman, had messaged me and said, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? And then something started to click. I started to realize I actually got phone calls from companies that were like, we want to offer you a job. I was like, I don't have to interview there. No, we read your blog. We know you're. So I was like, oh, wow, there's something cool here. And so I started to realize this idea of building a personal brand and marketing yourself. And so I ended up creating my own YouTube channel and my own podcast and expanding that blog to where I was getting millions of views. And then eventually all these opportunities came. I got this opportunity to do courses for this online learning company called Pluralsight, very similar to like LinkedIn Learning today. And I took that opportunity and started making courses for them. And then I started writing my book. I wrote this book, Soft Skills, Software Developer's Life Manual, because a publisher reached out to me. And then eventually I got to this point where I said, well, you know what? I should probably just quit my regular job, because I had royalty income coming in from these Pluralsight courses. At that point too, I ended up building up the real estate to the point where I only needed about, I figured, around $5,000 a month of income coming in from real estate to be financially free. Nice. And I hit that number at 33. And so I said, okay, I'm done. I'm exiting here. I wasn't rich, but I didn't have to work anymore. I could, and so I started running my own business, focused on building. I built a program on teaching other developers how to market themselves as software developers, and then eventually what ended up happening was I ended up moving my brand to what's now Bulldog Mindset, which is teaching personal development for men. But yeah, getting to the retirement stage was a combination of the real estate, but it got accelerated by the business, by building the personal brand, by building the business, and then taking that money that I was making from the Pluralsight courses, from my selling the courses on my own personal brand, and reinvesting that back into real estate to accelerate that process.
Incredible. Yeah, what a journey and what a story, and congratulations obviously on what you've managed to achieve. But before we move on to what you're doing now, which is obviously the kind of more path less chosen that you've gone down, what is it that made you realize that even at such a young age, like, why did you ever think about living so frugally and trying to make yourself financially free? What was your kind of goal at that stage, and how did you come to have that mindset? Because I think a lot of people that are listening, when they're that age, they're more interested in what they're doing at the weekend and where they're going out to and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. No one is really planning that far ahead and thinking, is it even worth sleeping on a mattress and starting to look at businesses and real estate, particularly at such a young age. So how did you come to think like that? What would your advice be to other people thinking like that?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I liked programming. In fact, I miss it. I enjoyed
Really?
my job. But what I didn't like is I just it just seemed weird to me that you come into this life and this planet and you don't get to live your life. You have to work.
Yeah.
You know, like you have to do something else for so that you can enjoy the weekends or holidays. It just seemed weird. I call it
Amazing.
mortgaging your life. Like there's a mortgage on your
Yeah.
life. And so I wanted to unmortgage my life. I just had that concept in my mind. I was like, I just want to have my own time back so I could do whatever I want. Like how cool would it be? It's like when you're a kid, right? You're able to do what you want to do with your time, right? But then that changes. You got to get a job. You got to go to college. You got to do all this stuff. It's like I just wanted to get free of that as soon as possible. And so I just had that idea in my head. And like I said, why did I want to do that? Because I wanted to play video games and sip Mai Tais on the beach. I thought, oh, that'd be great to do. It turns out that that's not, it's good to be able to do it if you want to, but that's not what you want to live your life doing. But yeah, that's what motivated me was just this idea of, hey, if I make some sacrifices now, then can I become totally free? Like I don't want to wait until I'm 65 or 70 years old to when you can't even enjoy life. And so just at an early age, I just that was kind of my dream. Is I just thought, okay, I don't want to have to do something. I want to be able to do what I want with my life.
Yeah, I love that. And the message actually is spot on. I think with a lot of people, they eventually will come to that realization, but perhaps then it's not too late, but they've obviously been in a kind of corporate job for so long that they've kind of put themselves behind the curve. And that was something that you got ahead of massively at the start. So yeah, it's amazing to hear, and hopefully people take some valuable takeaways from that. But then to go into what you're doing now, tell us a little bit, and you touched on it in a couple of answers ago, but what is Bulldog Mindset? How did it come to be a thing? What was the kind of idea and concept behind it, and where are you at with it now?
Yeah, so it's sort of a weird progression, right? So
Yeah.
I had a brand called, I still have the brand. In fact, I'm launching a new program for that brand called Simple Programmer, which was my original blog, which
Okay.
was focused on teaching soft skills to software developers, right? So I was creating these YouTube videos, and during that process, I was going through changes because I was a very shy, introverted,
Wow.
couldn't talk to a girl to save my life developer dork. All right,
Okay.
that's how I was growing up, and then I had this kind of come to Jesus moment at some point in my life where I was like, look, is this do you want this life or do you want to become something more? And, and at that point I was getting fat too, right? Because I was in shape at first and then I got fat, and I was like, no, this has to change. Like nothing's you know you're not going to become a rock star someday. It's just not going to happen. Like you have to make things happen. And so I went down this path of personal development. In fact, as I was learning marketing, people kept on recommending books, Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, and
Yeah.
I was like, why are all these rich people recommending this book? So I was like, okay, I read through part of the book. I'm like, this is, I just threw it in the trash. This is stupid. Like, this is woo woo. I'm an engineer. This is
Yeah.
right. So, but as I reading more marketing books and getting to brush elbows with more millionaires, that book kept on coming back up. So I was like, okay, fine. So I realized something, which was that it's impossible to know of your own ignorance, right? You're always ignorant of your own ignorance. So there must be things that you don't know that you don't know that you know them. You don't know them, right? If that makes sense, right? So you can't know you're ignorant when you're ignorant. It's impossible. That's what ignorance is, right? And so I said, okay, there must be these successful people are reading these books. There must be something I don't know, right? I'm not the all-knowing oracle, just because I'm an engineer. And so I gave it a real shot, read through the book. I still didn't quite like it that much, but I started opening up my mind to books like Maxwell Maltz, Psycho-Cybernetics. I read, what is the How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale
Great
Carnegie.
book.
All of the classic, The Power Magic of Thinking Big, and like every single one of these
Classic books. These amazing.
classic books, right? Just so many of these books, and and then at that same time, I was kind of going through a fitness journey too. So I started running, and so I was listening to audiobooks. Started listening to audiobooks at 3x speed. So now I'm getting through a
Wow.
book a week, and I'm like,
Wow.
how did I not know about all of these books? Tony Robbins, Awaken the Giant Within, and it's like all of a sudden my mind is expanding, and I'm realizing, hey, John, you got to overcome your fears, right? You got to go talk to women. You got to get to the gym and start like really, getting that self-discipline and mindset and get rid of the victim mindset. And so as I'm making these YouTube videos for programmers and I'm going through this transformation myself, it's like it's not lining up as much anymore. In fact, I'm getting
Yeah.
these messages from guys that are like, "Oh, I'm 21 years old. I've never had a girlfriend, never kissed a girl." And so I'm giving them a lot of the advice that I'm giving now is about masculinity and being a man, and because I'm learning that myself, right? Because I was not a man, at 33 years old, and so I decided to create a new brand. Since people kept on saying on my YouTube videos, they kept on saying, "How do I get that bulldog mindset that you have? How do you develop that bulldog mindset?" So I decided to create a brand called Bulldog Mindset and just
Love it.
focus on what I think is the biggest problem in society today, which is the masculination of men. That we don't have strong men in society. We don't have men that take pride in being a man, and in teaching that kind of stuff as I was growing and learning it myself. And so yeah, so that's where that brand came from. And so right now, I create videos, YouTube videos, do coaching for men, and I have a membership program called Bulldog Mindset Membership. But then I also have just launched something for a simple programmer to teach them how to build brands and market themselves as well, so that so I've got kind of both of those things going right now.
Yeah, amazing. So we'll obviously drop some links below in terms of to the program themselves. So then, what is actually involved, and kind of why? I guess the authority in the space that you have is because you've kind of gone through that life transformation yourself. But what is it that inspires you to then actually want to share that with other people? Obviously, you mentioned there's a kind of you see it as a modern issue in society in terms of not enough men being proud of being men. But what is it that inspired you then to go and share your own journey and that with people?
Yeah, it's just something that I believe that the way that you find your purpose in life is that you figure out what would you do in any station in life under any circumstance. So for example, for me, if I were a janitor, I would figure out the best way to mop the floors and I would teach all the other janitors how to do it, right? That's like no matter what, my purpose in life is that I will always assimilate information, synthesize it down and make it simple and then teach it to other people. That's what I've always done. It's what I did as a developer. And so that's the motivation for me is I can't learn all this stuff and transform myself and not share it and teach other people and try to simplify it for them to help them. It's just what I'm born to do and I'll always do. So that's really the thing that pushes me forward to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's quite clear that your mindset is very much set on this purpose and wanting to make this as busy as possible, really, because I think we've had the experience in terms of trying to put this podcast in, for example. We know that actually you are very busy and the kind of business is obviously thriving, you're working with lots of clients and you are constantly in these meetings. So is there ever times where you feel like your freedom is then threatened, or is it because you are so inspired and feel like this is your purpose that you're just enjoying it too much and this is actually how you want to live that financial freedom and retirement?
Yeah, yeah. The honest truth is that there are times. I mean, there's. I go through the ranges, right? There's times where I'm like, I wish I just had a regular job. You just click in, check in 9 o'clock, check out at 5 o'clock. You don't have to worry about anything. You just go do whatever you want to do afterwards, right? There's times where I'm like, I should just quit all this stuff. Why am I even doing this? Like, there's no need to do any of this stuff. I can just live and just do what I want to do. And then there's times that I'm super excited about what I'm doing, and I'm like, oh yeah, this, But you, as an entrepreneur, you're going to go through that entrepreneur roller coaster always, and and the thing that I found, because I've gone through multiple phases, I've gone through phases where I'm like, okay, someone else will become the CEO of the business, and I'll just, so I keep it going, and I'm just going to do what I want to do. And there's been times because I feel like I'm guilty. I feel guilty because I'm working too hard. And I'm not enjoying the freedom I have. But then there's been times where I'm like, you should be making more of yourself. You need to be working harder, and I've gone through these phases. And what I've come to realize after all of this of flipping back and forth from I don't want to do anything to I need to do crazy stuff is that I need to do crazy stuff. Right? I
Love
need
that.
to go. It's not just enough to run the marathon. I need to go and start training for the ultra marathon, right? It's not, it's like I need to keep on pushing the limit and keep on, because that's that's where we thrive, right? Ultimately, if I have a cure for depression, I'll tell you what it is. It's hard work, because that makes you more happy and more fulfilled than anything else does. And so yeah, so it's like, it's definitely something I've struggled with,
Yeah.
but But I've realized that I think for all of us that we need to have something that we're pushing towards. We're not going to like it all. I tell people all the time that I'm coaching, I'm like, whatever you do, you're going to hate it. I promise you, you're going to hate it. At some point, it doesn't, like, you might love it now, but especially when people pay you to do it, you're going to hate it. But no matter what, at some point, you're not going to like it, because at one point, my dream was I just want to become a software developer. And then at one point I was like, oh, if I could just blog for a living, that would be so cool. Or if I could just make YouTube videos for a living, or if I just coached people, right? Or just, it doesn't matter what it is. At some point you wake up and you're like, I don't want to do this, right? and so the point is that you can't avoid that. You just have to realize that, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. And so you can live every day and realize that you're going to have to fight the battle anew each day. And that's the way to live life. That's where you're going to find enjoyment. Is as long as you're looking for things that are going to grow you and expand you, and I can always find that. And like I said, not always is my mindset in the right place. Sometimes I do dread the day, and I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. But I always find myself back to it, and I can't escape it, because that is really what is long term going to bring you fulfillment and happiness.
Amazing, yeah, very honest but beautiful answer, really, and I think it's quite nice to kind of leave it on that as a key message in terms of I think people listening will massively resonate with that, and if they're not, hopefully they'll be inspired by it for sure. But just then to move on to our final question, as of course I'm conscious of your time, but I think someone might have shared this with you already, but in terms of if you were to go back maybe to that time, that I think the timeline I like to put on it is maybe that time you bought your first house when you were 19. If you were to jump back to that person then, what is one thing from that point forward that you would do the same, one thing you would do differently, and one thing you would have told yourself to motivate yourself?
Yeah. So the thing I would have done the same is to continue buying property and real estate to go down that path. The thing I would have done differently is I would have focused on one thing, one path, one obsession. I mean, it's good that I've gotten a broad scope of expertise, and I couldn't coach the way that I'm able to coach if I hadn't gone through all the things that I've gone through and experienced so many different things in life. But I know that I would be 100 times more successful if I just picked one path, one focus, and went deep into that path. So that's what I would do differently. And then what was the last question?
So what would you tell yourself to motivate yourself?
Oh, I would say that no matter what, as long as you keep on going, you cannot fail. No matter what, as long as you keep on iterating, as long as you are focused on whatever it is you're trying to achieve, you cannot fail. It's impossible that a person who keeps on going and keeps on adapting and iterating on what they're doing and is relentlessly pursuing it, it's impossible to fail.
Amazing. Beautiful way to finish. And I honestly think anyone listening can't really underestimate the value that you've shared with them today, really, John, because it's been fascinating to listen to you from myself. And I'm sure everyone that listening will also be able to take away some brilliant takeaways from, I guess, all the kind of wisdom and experience that you've had, but also the lifestyle you're living now and the purpose that you still remain to have in your life is going to be quite inspiring for some people. So thank you very much for jumping on. I'm glad we got it done. I know Sol will be absolutely gutted he's missed this episode when he listens back to it. And I'm sure he'll probably have to get in touch to try and pick your brains on it another time. But yeah, thank you so much for your time, John, and good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been an honor.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, just me again, and a really good episode though. I'm very glad I jumped on and did that. Sol's going to be gutted that the time zones didn't allow him to as well. I thought it was fascinating listening to John. Hopefully everyone listening also feels the same. But if you can stick with me for a couple more minutes, I'll just go through my three key takeaways from that episode. So I think the first one, which I thought was really interesting, was the kind of challenges that he mentioned when it comes to actually being free. I think everyone has this ideal perception in their mind that when they've reached financial freedom, when they're so-called retired, they think that's the end of the road and they can just go and probably do the similar stuff that he talks about, drinking Mai Tais on the beach, playing video games, doing whatever you want. And that might seem great, but ultimately you're probably going to get quite bored. And he actually referred to it with a really I think quite a poignant quote where he said, if you're not growing, then you're dying. So even if you retire at 33 like he did, and then you stop doing anything, at that point you're just dying every day, getting closer to dying, really, which is quite a morbid way of looking at it. But I do totally see the message that he was trying to share there. And the fact that he then went and refound his purpose is really important. So I think a kind of key takeaway for me is that anything that we're kind of looking to achieve, whether it's financial freedom, early retirement, we need to make sure that in the back of our mind we're also focused on the kind of purpose and motivation that we have in our own lives. So yeah, I thought that was really good. Hopefully Sol would agree with me on that as well. This second one was the idea of unmortgaging your life, which I've never really heard as a term or phrase used before, but the way he viewed the kind of corporate career and what he was doing working for somebody else and working towards building their own dream was the fact that he had mortgaged his life out. And what he was actually doing was kind of reclaiming that back and buying back his time, giving himself a bit more freedom to be able to build something like what he's done with the Bulldog Mindset and everything else that he's developing in terms of his blog, for example, and the Simple Programmer program, because that is something that wouldn't be possible if he didn't have that time because he was working a 9 to 5. And I know he kind of joked at the end there saying sometimes he wishes he was just in a 9 to 5 because life might be a little bit simpler, but ultimately he wouldn't find it as fulfilling. So I thought that was really useful for him to share. And yeah, the whole phrase around don't mortgage your life or unmortgage your life back, whatever you want to look at it at, is a really, really good takeaway there. And my third key takeaway, I think, is the idea of motivated sacrifices. And this was an idea that he touched upon when he was thinking about how could he live frugally and how could he kind of structure his life in a way that he was then going to be able to reach financial freedom and retirement. And I know that's kind of a common theme across all the takeaways. But in this, he considered stuff around whether it was eating macaroni and cheese, sleeping on a bed, on a mattress, on the floor. But all of them were kind of calculated. And in his head, he was trying to work out what is it that's motivated him. And is there enough motivation there to have made these sacrifices? So for anyone listening who doesn't have that motivation to make a sacrifice of not spending 100 quid on a night out, not going on this holiday and living a bit more frugally instead, if that motivation is not there, then there's no point doing it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's totally up to kind of each individual person and where they want to focus their energy and where they want to make any kind of sacrifice. But if you do have motivation for, say, in 10 years to be living the kind of lifestyle that he might be doing, then I think it's really important to maybe consider what sacrifices you could possibly make. I know it's something that I've done to quite an extent, but also massively that Sol's done. It's a shame he's not here to talk about it, but obviously for Sol, moving from London to Bali, there was a lot of sacrifice there. He's moved away from family, he's moved away from friends, and he's slightly changed in terms of his social circle. Well, slightly changed. I know anyone listening that knows him will know that he's massively changed, but those sacrifices are completely motivated for him, and it's massively paying off for him. And everyone knows how well he's doing. So that's the kind of thing that you're looking for, right? In terms of having that motivation to then be able to say, yeah, this sacrifice is totally worth it. So I think that's really good from John in terms of his final takeaway. So I know Sol's usually the one that's very good at doing this, but to summarize the 3 takeaways, the first one is that if you're not growing, you're dying. The second one is take back your life and unmortgage it. And the third one is find a motivation to make the right sacrifices. Okay, perfect. Well, I've kind of got through that myself. I hope that was all right. And if you reached this far, then thank you very much for sticking with us. But yeah, really good to chat with John. Definitely worth it making the time and making sure that one of us was here to interview him because fascinating character, an amazing life and career that he's lived. So very grateful for him coming on. And I'm sure next time it will be Sol and I. So if I was a pain this time, then stay tuned and you can listen to more of Sol next time. But yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.